Hello and welcome to the Storied Way Perspective, a podcast where we look at the many ways of how storytelling is shaping our world today. My name is Rituparna Ghosh, and I am your host, your guide, your co-traveler as we navigate the storied way together. On the podcast today, we have Gulrez Khan. I would like to describe him as a father, a data scientist, and a storyteller in that order. And when I get to him, I'm going to ask him, did I get the order right? He is the author of a fantastic book called Drawing with Kids, Cultivating Data Literacy, a screen-free journey through the art of visualization for kids. I love the title as much as I love the tagline that describes who is this book for and why it is written. I have thoroughly enjoyed reading the book, and I think it's an important book to have if you have a child or children, or B, if you are working with data at work, and C, if you are looking to find your quickest guide to understanding data visualization and data storytelling and simplifying it for yourself, for your children, and yes, have a lot of fun doing all of it. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, so let's dive in. Welcome to the Storied Way Perspective, Gulrez. How are you doing? And thank you for joining in from California. I know it's late in the evening today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all your kind words. It's great to be able to talk to you. And late evening, kids are asleep, and that's why I choose this time so we can have a good conversation.
I like it. And so my first question would be, did you tuck your kids in with a bedtime story today?
Not today. So my youngest one wasn't feeling well, so she went to bed early,
Mm-hmm.
and my son he's growing up, he doesn't need anyone. He's a 7-year old, so I
Mm-hmm.
was just helping with the dishes. So that's my end of the day routine for now.
Okay. All right. All right. So I described you as a father, as a data scientist, and then
Hmm.
a storyteller. Did I do that right? Or would you like to play with the order for me?
No, I think you did it perfectly right. I learn a lot from my kids, and everything that I do at my work also is impacted by how I am learning from my kids and my wife.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
all of these things do help. So good order.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So before we started recording, Gulrez and I were talking about how our children bring out the best in us, and they sort of help us understand our place in the world and our role as caregivers. At least that's what's done to me. Parenting has done to me. What is my role as not just to bring another, human being into the world, but also my role in enabling that human being to be productive and fruitful and do some well for himself or and to the world in general. So, and I think what we try to do through our work and through our parenting is to bridge the two halves of our lives together and see whether we can bring some kind of a work life balance and enjoy doing that as well. So, before we dive into the book, tell me, Gulrez, that before you wrote the book and became a children's writer, tell us something about your work as a data scientist and somebody who works with data. So, what has been your work life been? And when and how did you transition into bringing it to the home and working with your experience and working with your children in particular?
Yeah. So good question. If I reflect on my journey, and it goes back to 20 years back when I started, almost 20 years now. Uh, so I never wanted to be someone who would sit in front of the computers all day. I was happy writing poems and would have settled writing a book or two. But then, coming from a humble background, that was not an option. I still remember my elder brother telling me, Barkurdar, we need to pay off the loans. And that's where, I just followed him. We are three brothers. And he took maths, I took maths. He took engineering, I took engineering. So just following the footprints. And I completed my engineering as an average student, and there were no offers that time, nothing. Then, I remember, we had a family meeting with me, my mom, my elder brother, and I said, let me do MBA, and this time I'm going to work really, really hard, and I'll get good grades, and inshallah, I'll get an offer as well. So I moved to Pune, and over there, I was preparing for CAT, like the Common Entrance Test for MBA colleges. And one fine day, I got a call from my elder brother. I picked up the phone and he said, there is a walk in happening for TCS in your city. Why don't you go and attend it? And I said, they will not take me. I don't think I'm good enough. And I was disqualifying myself. And he said, no, just go and attend. So I went there. They had a written exam, so I completed it. I cleared that. And few hours later, I found myself in front of the HR giving an interview. And she asked, describe an ideal job for you. And that's where the poet in me woke up. And I said, as Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore has told in Gitanjali, where the mind is without fear, where the head is held high into that freedom of heaven, that's the kind of environment I want to work in. And guess what? I was hired. I didn't know this is how it's gonna work. So I was there, I joined. But the reason I'm telling the story is people often ask, okay, what motivates someone to join tech and do those things? Everyone has different stories. For me, it was money. Right? We wanted to pay off
Yeah.
the loans, and that's why I moved in. And now, the question that you asked was how did I transition from data to storyteller to what the book that I've written? So I joined TCS. I was doing a lot of technical work over there. But then within the heart of my heart, I was a storyteller. I was a poet, but I'm an introvert. I don't talk a lot. And I still remember my first meeting in Microsoft where I was shivering to the core. I've written everything on the slides and I wouldn't look at the audience. I would just read from what's there on the slide. And it was the audience of 4 people, 2 of them from my own team. And I was that nervous. And then it was then that my eldest daughter was born. And when she turned 3 or 4, I used to tell her stories. And she would listen to it like anything, like she was the perfect audience. And she was saying, okay, what's next? What's next? And with all her ears, like she was so engrossed in those stories. And I was very happy. I thought maybe I should try it at work as well. So I tried it at work. And guess what? The adults, they wanted to listen more of that. Everyone was tired listening to the jargons that we are using in our day job. Every day we have 5 to 6 meetings. And guess what? What do you remember after those meetings? The stories. If I start by telling that, hey, last evening I couldn't sleep because my daughter was sick and I had to go and do this, everyone could relate. And then I say, this is if I give this analogy and try to have some on call rotation things talking about those things and the problems, they are able to understand. So that's how I started. So as I said, kids are our teacher. And after that, I kept doing more and more of that. And I was enjoying to the core. So I'll pause here. I don't know, if you've got any other questions,
No, no,
or
you
I
can
can
go
go on
on.
and on.
I see you are a gifted storyteller, Gulrez. I can see that, and I think you whether it is as a routine to break away from the routine of your mundane day job of working with data and going through boring presentations and innumerable meetings, or that little break into let's dip into a story, let's go out so that we can come in. I teach that technique so that you tell a story
Nice.
about going out, so from your life, something that you've watched, something that has happened to you, something that you've seen, you've read. You go out of that room to bring a story
Hmm.
in, and then you bring people back into your narrative, into what you want them to look at, because an analogy helps them, okay, break out of this, of what I'm seeing, but imagine something else and then see how does it work in my space. uh,
Mm-hmm.
so you mentioned that with your work life, your presentations were very boring, and you decided to use storytelling. And at what point did the visualization bit kick in? because we today we I work with a lot of businesses. We talk about business storytelling. We also talk about data visualization. We also talk about data storytelling. And while not everybody starts with the sense of curiosity and experience of having worked with their own children and then say, okay, well, how can I replicate this experience at the workplace? But a lot of us are also struggling with it. So, what point did storytelling, data visualization merge into your work?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I was hired in TCS for I worked a couple of years in Pune, and then I moved to Seattle. So in Seattle, I was kind of replacing the person who was at on-site, and they wanted to take a break, so I was doing those things. And after that, like I was given a different opportunity, and that was kind of operations world. There, like you will get up in the middle of the night and write some scripts, reboot some servers, those kind of things. And that's where like I started doing some analysis, like of all these data, like all these logs, which are there for hundreds of servers where things are happening. So I started writing it, and then uh, I started creating those visuals, and that's when like things meet, right? So going back as a 22-year-old who didn't want to spend his life in front of computers and was interested in poems and those kind of artistic things, right? And here, like when I wrote that code and for the first time, I saw some bar graphs that I created, and then I started enjoying it. And I said, okay, can I do it in this way or that way? And none of that work was done by anyone from my team or from my org. So data science discipline was not there at that time. As I said, I was in the operations world. So I was very successful. Like people started admiring what I was doing. They stopped calling me in the middle of the night. So they gave me more respect. And I started doing more and more of those things. So that's where like things merged, and
Because you
then
were
like
doing
one thing
something.
after another. Yeah.
Gulrez, is it about that you were doing something that others were missing? They were not doing it that way. So I think it is. Was it that sort of got everybody to sit up and notice that there is another way to present data than to just dump it out on an Excel sheet and make it look very appealing because of the way you would put it up on a screen. Is that why that suddenly broke the pattern?
It's more about solving the problem, right? So when we
Hmm.
were solving the problem as database administrators and whatnot, we are looking into all those intricacies, like what's happening, looking into the logs when things are happening. But here, like there is another person who comes in and just looking into the logs, extracting that, and visualizing it, right? When you
Yeah.
start visualizing, it's easy to figure out what problems are happening, and you are solving problem in a totally different way. And it's easy to look into the aggregated data in that format. And I was just enjoying it. Like this was like coming back to the poetry and bringing those colors and then all those things. So that's something which helped me. So that was like around 10, 15 years ago. Now, after that, the data science discipline that I think it was 7, 8 years ago when I was in Microsoft, that's when the discipline actually came in. And I remember my manager, Caroline, at this time, she said, there's the new discipline which came in. Do you want to move to this discipline and we'll hire another person to do the work that you are doing? So I was happy, like having a scientist in a title is something good. And for me, like an average student coming and getting this kind of a title, I was happy. So, so that helped. And then now, when I look into the data science community, right? So when I looked into all the people who are creating these models, doing these ETL, extract, transform, load, and whatnot, we spend a lot of time in analyzing the data, creating those machine learning models. But when it comes to the last mile of sharing that insights, that's where we lack a lot. Like it's just 5 minutes before your presentation that you dump everything in those PowerPoint and then start showing it to the stakeholder. And the stakeholders are busy. They've got their phones in their hand, and then the kids running in the background. So it's hard to
And a
get the
decision,
attention.
and a decision to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
made very quickly.
And decisions are like already made, right? So within their heart, they already know what they want to do. And here, the challenge for a data person is to bring data and say that, hey, you know what? We should do this because this is the pattern that I'm seeing in the data.
Mhm.
And if you just show that as jargons, just some bullet points, you'll not be able to win people. That's where like a storyteller comes in and then talks about something different and things change.
So, can you give for the listeners of the podcast, Gulrez, uh, and I can imagine a lot of people again from maybe parents understanding what is the future of data science and whether they would like to steer their children towards this field. Uh, could be a parent who may want to buy a book and try and see that will this book help my child also become data literacy skills. It could be a an analyst working with data and trying to figure out where and how will I use data storytelling at the workplace. Let's assume we have all kinds of listeners right now. Could you give us one uh, example of how a data driven story can change or impact decision making at this point of time? So therefore the importance of having an understanding of data and how to visualize it, and again to tell it like a story. Can you give an example?
So, one example, let's see. The other day, I'm working from home most of these days, and my kids are homeschooling. So, as a family, we stay like at home most of the time. So, the other day, I was finishing up a call at work, and I came out to in the kitchen to get a drink of water or something. And I remember like my 12-year-old daughter, like she was 10 at that time. She called me. She said, Abu, come here. And I said, what? And she was reading this book called Birds of North America. And I said, okay, that's interesting. But I was still focused on my previous call. And she said, look into this. And she was looking into a graph. And the graph was about the pitches, the sound of the birds that they make, and based on the sound, like the pitches they make, they will identify the species of the bird. And I was scratching my head looking into that graph, and she said, "This looks like a snore graph from your book." In my book, I don't know, like if you have read that, like the
Yes,
first
I have.
chapter is
The first chapter.
she's yeah, so she is looking into the snore graph, right? So she creates a snore graph. I have sleep apnea, so I snore a lot, and she creates a doodle with a snoring man, right? So what she was able to relate that complex graph with the snore graph. Now, when we look into the adults, right? So how many times we have seen those people? Anytime there is a math equation which comes in and they are reading something, they want to just move that page to the next one quickly. If they are looking into a graph, they want to just move to the next one. So the reason is we have that memory which is making us afraid of those things, right? Now, pat on my back, like she was able to associate a good memory with a graph that she encountered. She was able to say, okay, we had this funny thing that we did together, and now I'm hoping in future when she get in front of the audience and she looks kind of a complicated graph, she'll not be afraid. She'll not be closing her eyes that, hey, I don't want to look into this and just move to the next page. So I think that was that's a good example. Uh, what was your other question?
No, I think it's a terrific example because I am one of those people who will also say, okay, I have to now use my brain more to understand what have they shown graphically. I'm one of those people, but it's very important and very interesting to see that a little child who is unafraid of numbers and of a graph and is in fact curious about it. So I think that's all good
Mm-hmm.
learning begins with curiosity, and lots and lots is possible with that. So you know let's talk about then that transition. So when you sort of understood that this is great at work, how when and how did you bring it at home? Did you write this book as a parent? Did you write this book as a data scientist and a storyteller? With what intention did you bring it home? Because I want to talk about that subtext, that byline in your book as well, because I think that's where it brings in the reason why you wrote it. So tell us something.
Yeah. So one thing is that I talk a lot about myself, and the perception that I've seen in people is Gulrez is a great father, like he's spending a lot of time with the kids and whatnot. But the fact is, it's my wife. She's the person. She is the one who is homeschooling our kids, and she sacrifices a lot. Like she was a university topper, working in Microsoft, and then leaving everything, and now like ensuring she spends time with the kids. So I just wanted to call it out. Like it's not me.
Oh
I
yes.
might be there in the book, in the title, and in the podcast, doing all those things, but I'm not the main person who's doing work with the kids. So, so I think that's very important to call out.
Very
And while I
important.
was
And thank
doing,
you so much. Thank you so much, Gulrez, for saying this, because uh, every time when it comes to parenting, one parent's voice sort of stands out, but it's always co-parenting. No children are brought into this world alone. No children are raised alone. And yes, there are situations and families where there's one parent filling in for both, and I'm all up for it. But in a home, yes, it's quite challenging, and lots of kudos to you and Farhad. Her name is Farhad, right?
Mhm.
Is that right? Yeah, your wife's
Yeah,
name is Farhad. So
yes,
lots of kudos to you and Farhad to raise three children and to do it right. Let's hear the story.
yeah, yeah. So going back to your question, right? So my wife is homeschooling her kids. I do read some books with them every now and then. And when I was looking into their books, I saw this is a missing piece. For me, I live and breathe data most of the time. And when I was looking into their books, I told my wife that, hey, I think there is a gap and maybe I should write a book about it. And she said, go for it. And like all the big things that people do, it's mostly about the first time you have told someone about it. And if she
Mm.
would have said, no, it's a bad idea, or you don't have time, how would you manage it? That project would have been killed at that moment itself. But then she supported, she said, I think that's a fantastic idea. So I said, okay, maybe we should do something about it. And then like when I was writing a book, right, so again there is my original self of like a storyteller and a poet who wanted to do those kind of things. And here when I'm writing this book, I wanted to bring it together. I wanted to have those stories, and it's not just a book, like it is many aspects to it. If you look into it, I also wanted to bring in like this is about a family, about an Indian family living in the US. It is about a Muslim family, right? It's gives a glimpse of people like us.
Yeah.
Often, like we have read Tom, Dick, and Harry most of the time,
Mm.
and we are not able to identify ourselves when we read those books. Here, like when people read the book and they have this paratha patterns, like they get
Mm.
very happy, right? Hey, I eat paratha as well, and here someone is not talking about pancakes. Yes, pancakes are good, but parathas are more yummy. So anyways, like I also wanted to bring those things in. So it's just there are stories, and I wanted to bring those things out as well. And when I created these things, like I was not very sure, like a lot of people mentioned like you've got a cover, like is it a religious book? The girl is wearing a hijab. and you should change it, you're limiting the audience, and things like that. But for me, it was not about selling more copies, it was about telling a story that people have not heard about. So that's how like it came into being. And alhamdulillah, like it's been like well received, like it's getting awards and being translated in few other languages as well. So I think I'm grateful for what's happening.
The Storied Way Perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag Podcasting Network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com. No, you have a fantastic career as a children's writer for sure. Let me tell you that. Because of and I'll say it like this because as a storyteller, I work a lot with children. I work a lot with children's books, and I see it coming out of a certain gap that we have. One of them is, of course, like you mentioned when we started talking right now, is your of your wife and homeschooling, because that's something which is very important and interesting, because a lot of us, a lot of parents sort of outsource learning to the school, right? So when it's outsourced or to tutors, it's assumed that the education will come from their it's in somebody else's hand. You don't need to mess with it. You don't need to interfere with it. You need to step in to look at, okay, is my niche covered? Are they talking about it? Like even yesterday, I was in a school and we did a lot of interesting things about what do you want to grow up to be, and all the kids said very interesting things, and I said nobody wants to be a storyteller. I mean, that's really sad. I'm really feeling very sad about it. So sometimes when you work with children or when you step into your own home, you sort of look at how are they talking about what we do in the big world today, right? And I think that sort of blends in. So you're homeschooling, you're identifying a gap in the learning, and then identifying that there needs to be an inclusive intervention which sort of makes your child or your children feel that they are seen, that they are counted, that there are stories about children like them, and it's perfectly fine to wear a hijab and to be a protagonist in my father's story because I'm the heroine, and the story is about me, and then making it about something else as well. So it's a very, very, very important. You've actually thrown a beautiful stone in the ripple of children's literature of enabling people to create books like this. So the next question is it important for children to be literate or to have data literacy skills? Uh, According to you, you felt that that was the gap. So why is it important?
I think this is very important because if I look in at my like what my colleagues are doing, and most of kids, like you said, your son is 13-year-old.
Yeah.
We send our kids to coding classes and then different other classes. Like, but one thing is for sure, like no matter what career they choose, they would be dealing with data, whether it would be presenting numbers or it would be interpreting numbers or just sitting in the meeting and listening to someone who is presenting the data, right? So there are a lot of things that could happen. Even if you are just looking into the data someone is presenting, there's a lot of manipulation which is going on, right? So it's easy to deceive someone. It's easy to lie with data. I do these workshops as well with the high schoolers. Like I've done it a couple of times, and I was talking about like how you can deceive someone with data. Like initially, like I would talk about how do you tell stories with data, make them fall in love with data. Now, like once they are in, that's when I would say, okay, now comes the bad part, right? How can you understand that the data, the graph which you are being shown is to deceive you? And then we talk about those examples. And then, like, I remember, like, the other day, I showed them examples, and then the following class, someone came up and he came up with another example he has seen on the internet and said, like, this is someone lying with data. And that's another pat on my back that, hey, this is data literacy, right? And that's why, like, it is very important. These days, when we are living in the world of AI and the chat GPTs and whatnot, coding and other things, like you'll get more and more help on that. But it's more about understanding data and storytelling with data, which is very important.
No, and you've touched the very interesting part of what even I talk about. That a story is a tool to manipulate people and their perception of something. If you know the true power of storytelling, it's not about, okay, I've made it interesting for someone. I mean, a story can, like you mentioned in your PPT, when the moment you put up a visual, a data, visualize data, and you weave it like a story, it becomes very interesting for someone to listen to. But a story can also manipulate people into believing lies and misinformation. And when you mix it with data, there is this potent combination that can really steer people into doing something else. Where are people? Do you think this is happening deliberately in the world today, or are people just sort of falling into a trap of not knowing, the right way to tell us a data story?
So I see two things. One is like if you use any software, right? So you mentioned about Excel or
Hmm.
any other software, right? The default view that you get is could be like the innocent mistake, right?
Yeah.
And that's where like you need to take those classes or take some lessons, right? So how do you tell stories and then ensure that you're not cutting off the y-axis and then presenting data which is proper. So there are some innocent mistakes that I have seen as well. And then I've seen like in political games, right? So people, like, if it's just a few point of differences, you can make it look really, really big. And I've seen both of those things.
Yeah.
So
in
you
Ind-
so
in, in India, then right now there is this whole movement of reading the label of food that we buy.
that's very good.
And
Yeah,
because, yeah,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
there is label padho India, something like that's happening, where read the label as to what kind of the fats, the sugars, the carbs that there are, and because the packaging is telling a different story, but your label is telling a different story, how do you really understand that you're being manipulated, or you're being cheated, or you're being
Mm-hmm.
lied to? And that is a lot of awareness is building is happening. A lot of content is being shared with people. A lot of, I mean, I was in a school yesterday where they had a poster on that, which made sure that the children
Mm-hmm.
are reading what the label into what they are consuming every single day. Uh, Going back to with the whole thing about, I mean, going back to the thing about your book, what I also like is that your book has been structured with everyday stories, with your children, with your daughter particularly, and that is enabling her to understand data. So, while working with children, you recommend that as an ongoing practice? That how to weave your everyday life into making data interesting and fun for children.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And if when you're talking about the book, it's kind of a realistic fiction. So
Yeah.
these are not just made up stories. Like these were the things which were really happening. There's a chapter for called Snakes and Ladder, and we have all played Snakes and Ladder back home, like when we were growing up. And here, like at my office, they had this kids at work day, and they gave the Snakes and Ladder thing to my kids, and we brought that home. And over the weekend, I was thinking, okay, let me go and write a chapter for the book. And they said, no, this is weekend. We want you to play with us. I said, okay. And then we started playing Snakes and Ladder. But then there is this thing which I have in my mind, like, okay, I kind of I'll always think about data. So there is this, so the stories is one thing, but then within my like mind, unconsciously, like I always think of data. And when I'm looking into the score, I say, okay, this is a good way to create a scatter plot.
Mhm.
And when I do these workshops for the adults, so I do these half day workshops and then like to the universities and whatnot, I present this scatter plot of this mortality rate on the x-axis and number of kids on the y-axis. And then you cut that into 4 quadrants. And then you would see, okay, the leftmost and the bottom one is one which has got less number of kids and less mortality rate. This is the industrialized world. And then the right top, you would have high mortality rate and high kids per woman. And 1962, it would be India, Pakistan, Bangladesh in that quadrant. So and then I do some animation and things like that. Now with snakes and ladder, I was able to reciprocate that. I said, okay, let's count the number of snakes and ladders because my son was unhappy with being hissed by all the snakes. So I said, okay, let's cut it into 4 quadrants. And I asked, which quadrant do you want to be to win the game? And then they said, we want more ladders and less snakes. And that's what like they are learning, right? Even without knowing that they are learning, and next time when they go and look into a scatter plot of someone showing mortality rate or things which are boring, they would be able to understand it. They'll not
Fantastic.
like close their eyes. So these are like realistic fiction stories. And I think all of us should do that. And again, like this is the concept of homeschooling. So with homeschooling, like it's more about like not just reading a curriculum. It's more about your kid is showing interest in something, and then you use that topic to teach them about certain thing. We go to these different places for visits, right? So we don't have television at home, so we go more on the experiences. So I think a couple of weeks ago we went to visit uh, um a national park over here. And then like as we were visiting, like my wife was continuously talking about, okay, these are the different type of stones which are there, which you are seeing. Like this is granite, like there is this big rock of this. And then they were like continuously talking about those kind of things. And now like when they have seen it and then they have felt it and they have stories attached to it, they'll be able to understand it more than what I remember of those metamorphous rocks and whatnot, which I never saw, but just read in the geography books, right? So I think those kind of things really, really help.
I think I have to do another episode with you and your wife about how you're homeschooling your children, and particularly what experiences are you weaving in, because that's another way we talk about stories, particularly
Mm-hmm.
how stories can be integrated at home as a parent and a child, where you take out a concept, even if you're traditionally schooled, take out a concept from your chapter, experience it in the world, and see what learning can you apply, because that's the whole objective of whether education for that matter, is that you're learning something and you apply it into the real world and see how does that fit in. So I think we must come back again, maybe with you and your wife, or maybe just with Farhad, to see how are you creating these experiences with children, and I call it living in a story, where learning happens very seamlessly. Your book is now receiving a lot of awards. You said it's being translated. How many languages has it been translated into by now?
So, so right now, like German is done. I just, uh, I think, requested the proof copy. Arabic, we are in conversations. There is also this discussion going on to animate that and in the animation series. So that's going
Lovely.
on. So, so that's what's going on right now. But I'm hoping to translate into Hindi and Urdu as well. So, because that's something that I know of. And then,
Yes.
like, if listeners are interested, do reach out and we may involve you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Have you done an audio version of your book?
That's one more project which I want to do. And
You must.
I'm actually looking for some audio artist. Like, I wanted to make it a kind of an immersive experience.
Yeah.
So it's not kind of a boring, it's something which people can do. Like there is this off-screen component as well in the book. So
Hmm.
maybe like if teachers are there, they can just play the recording, people are listening, the audio, and able to follow the things along. So that's something I want to
Yes,
do as well.
yes, yes. Do you think people are picking up the book for themselves or for their children first, in terms of your
Yeah,
readers?
yeah. So that's also fascinating. Like when I wrote the book, I wrote it mostly for the kids. Like I said, okay, this is something for my kids' age, and I was thinking, okay, 7 to 14 years. And when I started looking into the reviews and then people reaching out, it was the moms, and then they are saying that I know, like you have written it for the kids, but we are
Mm.
using it to learn ourselves as well, because it
Yes.
is written in a way that someone said like it's like data for dummies, but even kids can
Hmm.
understand. So
Hmm.
that was not my intended audience, but I'm seeing more and more people who are like using it for themselves. uh, I think someone from Saudi Arabia, like he reached out and he said, I was looking for a book for myself, and I saw this book which you have written for kids, but I think I should be using it for myself as well. So I see like a lot of people are using it for themselves, and I'm also like thinking of converting this into a series. Like I have got the second book, which is already like thought into. So maybe I'll be covering more topics and see where it lands.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's what I said when I first read your book. I found you on LinkedIn first. That then I picked up your
Okay.
book and I read it. And that's the first thing that came to me, that this is made a concept of data visualization and storytelling, both of them. Because there are a lot of books which sort of talk about data visualization, but they don't do it in as such simple words that even if you're not from a data background, you can understand it very well. That from that point of
Hmm.
view, and therefore it fits in to a very let's say fluid space where it's a book for children, it's a book for adults, it's a book for people who want to use both data and stories fantastically. So it's a children's book and not a children's book at the same time. So that's how I started looking at it. When it comes to challenges, let's talk about the professional who's also trying to now understand data, and all the adults who are picking up your book. When it is about looking at data, or trying to visualize it or weave it into a story, what are the typical challenges that people face?
Yep. So the number one challenge, maybe like let's go back a little. So first is learning, right? So when I was learning data science, I was using again like Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? So
Yeah.
reading about a different culture, and the data set that I was using, I was doing this thing for clustering. Like there is this technique called clustering where you cluster similar components together, and so there's this machine learning algorithm for that. And when I was using that, the example was for this iris flower. And basically, like you look into the length and the width of those petal leaves, and based on that, you define, okay, whether this is versicolor or then other varieties. And me, like, I like gardening, but not so much into those botanical jargons, right? So it was hard for me, like learning a new thing with a new kind of data set. So when I was thinking, like when I teach my kids, I wanted to make it easier for them, right? Something that they can relate to. Like here, Snakes and Ladder, everyone can understand, okay, what's going on in the game, right? But if you're talking about some other principle, like some other data sets which I've not seen, and I see like it's in the math exercises as well. Like here, like this is a book for my daughter which I've been like working on, and here like she gets all these examples of things that she has not seen, right? They're talking about this golf game, and she has never seen a golf game. They're talking about some other concepts which are like nothing which she's able to relate to. So we want to make it easier so that they can understand. So I think that's important. So that was learning. Now going a level up to the practitioners, right? So when people are practitioners, they are data scientists or analysts or anyone like dealing with data, especially like when it is more about the technical people, when they talk and they present numbers, they tend to talk about everything that they have done with the data, right? So they would say that, hey, I looked into the data, I used this library, Python library, and I did this and this and this and this. And by the time that they are explaining it, the audience, the business stakeholders, they are already bored, right? They are not paying attention to you and you have lost them. So we don't want to give all the details, like less is beautiful, right? So that's where like you don't have to show everything. That's where the storyteller comes in and they talk about an incident which audience can relate to. So you start with a story. It's just the first 2 minutes in every presentation. The audience decide whether they want to make pay attention to you or not. So you have done that. Now, don't tell everything, just tell small things which are relevant and what should the business do. So that's the pitch, right? Now, you do the same thing with data. You can, like with tools like Excel, Power BI, Tableau, you can do number of things, right? You just drag, drop, and it's done, and you feel happy. But it looks like the coloring book of my 5-year-old, and I cannot pay attention to everything which is shown there in the dashboard. So can I use start with a gray color and then just to focus on just a specific thing which I want the audience to look into. Use pre-attentive attributes, reduce the cognitive load on the audience. So those are the things which can make life easier and easier. And I teach these things in those workshops and the talks which I give, and people find it really informational, right? So this is kind of a different kind of talks in the data science world. So
So you mentioned that you're an introvert, and now you are starting with this book. You became transitioned into being a storyteller. Now you're doing workshops. You are a keynote speaker, and I have watched your videos where you've gone and given talks, and you also talk a lot about your talks and where your daughter corrected you at one point of time in some talks. You talk a lot about data and storytelling. Are you enjoying this new phase of your life? What are you learning from interacting with people who are looking at data through you today?
I, I'm enjoying this. Like I am an introvert, but I'm used to the mics. Like as a
Mm.
poet, when I was doing those things in the school and colleges, like I used to like be able to take a microphone and do a little poem or something. So I used to do those things. But then I think I found my voice much, much later in my career.
Mhm.
I was very shy, like I didn't know like what's where life would take me, and a lot of things like where you would not be happy or like confident, right? So I remember, right, I was growing up, and I think I must have been in my fourth grade, and I still remember that moment, uh, third grade maybe, yeah. And it was the month of May or March, summer that month. And then like I was in like convent school, and over there like we used to have those school assemblies, and even before the assembly, like we would prepare for that. That okay, you'll be presenting in front of the whole school. Now let's do the preparation, and there would be like 4 or 5 people who would be asked to read a prayer or something, and we were like rehearsing. And I remember like a girl, like when it was my turn, there was a girl. She said, "Come sit in the everyone comes sit in this front row. This guy will be shivering. वो कांपता बहुत है." So I said, and my teacher like she told like this is the month of March and you are shivering. So that's how like the confidence I grew up with. And when I did my first presentation, like I was shivering. Even now, like when I go and give keynotes, I shiver. But now I'm more confident in shivering. I know like everyone does. initially, like I used to be like just think of myself that hey, I am not good enough and have those things, but you you just accept yourself, right? I know like my English is not very good. I make a lot of grammatical mistakes. I have an accent and whatnot. But then once you accept it, things become a little easier. And people are not there just to have with their red color marker and identifying whether you use bring or brought. They are here to listen to your stories and they are enjoying it. So I think that's life.
And I wanted to ask this question because stories transform the teller as well. They impact and shape the teller into finding a very unique version of themselves, which gives them a lot of confidence, which gives them the courage to accept their flaws, accept their mistakes, their weaknesses, and yet step forward to go ahead and tell a story. Uh, and I have experienced it myself several times in my life. And I feel that somebody who's also transitioning from, let's say, talking about something in their work life to bringing it to their home and then taking it out again into the world, you sort of transitioning twice over, right? And in doing that, it also, in this little transition, you're also reinventing yourself and discovering who you want to be, working with children and with other communities. So, sort of winding down our conversation right now, Gulrez, a couple of things. Your book is doing extremely well. I know you have a website. I know you're making guides. I remember reading somewhere. I remember reading on your LinkedIn that you made a journal for your daughter during Ramadan of how to document her journey. So, can you tell us about that and any more plans of enabling children to document their data stories every single day in a fun way? What are your future plans?
Yeah. So as I said, like I keep thinking of data all the time, and yeah, like this is a fun adventure. Like this is kind of a personal passion project which I was doing, and it's encouraging to see a good reception.
Mm.
So once I've seen this, now I want to do more of that. Right now, I'm on sabbatical, which is like I get a month off from work. So I'm doing lots of these activities. My wife is writing a book, so I'm helping her with that. She just fired me as an illustrator, and so I'm a little low on the motivation side for the illustration part. Uh, but yeah, like talking about the Ramadan journal, like it's more about the reflection. And my wife actually created a Ramadan journal for her friends. And then I said, okay, I think if we convert this into a data journal, it would be more useful, or like it's just my fancy. And we did that. And it's again like a story, right? So when I created the Ramadan journal, even before that, the other day, like me and my son, we were going to the mosque for our evening prayer. And he would tell me that, hey, I was out most of the day today. And I said, okay, good for you. And he asked me, well, what about you? And I said, I was out just for a couple of times, one for the morning prayer and now the evening prayer. So, so that's when I thought, okay, maybe I need to put this, we can create a timeline visual. So we created a visual that, hey, these times you were out, this time I was out. And it was fun. And similar to that, like Ramadan is a very important time for us. Every single minute we want to ensure that we are spending it wisely. So here, like you have a timeline and you write it down like, okay, I should have spent this time better, right? And then it's not just for Ramadan, it's for everyone, right? This is like another version of which will be coming soon, where everyone, like all of us, like we can have our own journal. You create a timeline. This is where I spent time. This is where I was uh, podcasting, or this is what I was playing outside, right? Or maybe I should have done this or done that. So more to reflect on, right? So I think so those things. And as I said earlier, I want to create a series out of it. And then it's not just the series and the book, it's more about our experiences, realistic fiction. So lots of interesting stories which I want to tell to the world. Uh, I want to get it across through this manner or through this tool.
Lovely. And any plans of sort of creating a teacher's resource? Because I do see it. In fact, I while talking to a set of teachers a couple of months back, and that is before I had read your book. I had mentioned your book because we're talking about maths and we're talking about stories and we're talking about how integrating storytelling is not just something for the early years, but it is also for the middle school and high school. And your book sort of, I had read about that book, but I had not read it yet.
Mhm.
So I just mentioned it that there is a book on that, and it's great because your children will be required to look at data and will are required to analyze data even in higher grades. So, any plans
Yeah.
of sort of working with the educator community? We need it in India. Trust me, Gulrez. Any help that you need while for working with teachers, I'm happy to collaborate with you because we do need to create this ecosystem where understanding the world around through realistic stories is very powerful than to go to any other fictional story or story made on the go. Ram went to this and Sham went there and these bought two oranges and six apples and how many fruits did they bring? That's the kind of sort of quick cash stories we use for numbers in any case. So, any plans for
Mhm.
educators?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, as I have created this website, Drawing Data with Kids, I'm planning to add more of those resources. So, once you have completed the chapter, for example, the snore graph, the sneeze graph, and those kind of things, I want to add a section which you can do for like advanced readers, right? So, for example, the adults who are using it. So the example from the New York Times or some other examples where these type of graphs have been used, or some other things which could be there, right? For example, the scatter plot, right? So what other ways you can use it? So things like that. So stay tuned for that. If you are on the website, just subscribe to that or follow me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'd be happy to take more feedback. I would love to collaborate with the teachers. The book is just published in India, I think 2 days back. It was already there on Amazon, but the price was high because of the import thing. Now it is locally published, so it's more cheaper. So I want to get it in the hands of more people. I'm also interested to see like whether it would be useful to translate into our local languages, because right now we are living in this kind of a uh, mindset that okay, everyone should understand English, or like that's what I was thinking, like most of the people, but maybe we need more localized versions as well, and that's my blind spots. So if you are interested, anyone is interested and have got thoughts, love to collaborate and add these resources uh, in different ways and help more people, more kids to be data literate.
Absolutely. I'm with you on this, Gulrez, and I do have some ideas of how I would love to collaborate with you. I work with storytellers, I work with schools, I work with storytellers who work with children, parents, and schools. And I do see it as an opportunity to collaborate, to talk about data literacy with children in fun ways, in story filled ways, which also enables them to create their own data stories and maybe create a program for them. So I'm happy to have this conversation with you. And thank you so much for taking out time. It's the end of the week, nearly the end of the week for you, but late in the evening. Thank you so much for having this conversation. I had a wonderful time. I hope the feeling is mutual. Staying up and talking
Yeah,
about. I'm
sure.
sure you like talking about data, so I don't think that's would have been a problem.
No, I think it's a wonderful experience. The only thing is my laptop is about to shut down because of the battery. But thank you so much for having me.
Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.